Before you misunderstand this title, let me say something very clearly. No verse is magic. Psalms are not spells. God is not manipulated by repetition. What I'm about to share is not superstition, it is spiritual exposure. When I was deep inside witchcraft, there were certain scriptures we ignored and others we actively tried to counter. Not because they were popular, not because they sounded powerful, but because of what happened in the spiritual realm when people spoke them with understanding. The Psalms were at the top of that list, especially when it came to poverty. Most people think poverty is only financial. We knew better. Poverty is spiritual first, manifesting as cycles, leakage, delay, confusion, constant loss, and effort without reward. And when those cycles were established, they were hard to break, unless someone activated the wrong scripture. I remember sitting in gatherings where assignments were reviewed, businesses failing, doors closing, money slipping away as fast as it came. And then suddenly, without rituals, without prayer lines, without drama, something shifted. Accounts stabilized, unexpected provision appeared. Debts cleared in ways that didn't make sense. Opportunities opened without strain. And every time we investigated, we found the same thing. Someone had been speaking specific psalms consistently, not emotionally, but positionally. That's what frightened us. Not loud prayer, not begging God, not religious activity, but believers who understood how psalms establish divine jurisdiction. These weren't people chasing wealth, they were people restoring order. And once order was restored, poverty lost its legal ground. I didn't leave the occult because I lost interest. I left because I saw how often believers were suffering financially, not because God withheld provision, but because no one taught them how to speak from covenant instead of desperation. This video is not about instant riches. It's about breaking poverty cycles at the root. I'm going to reveal the Psalms we could never silence, why they disrupted financial oppression so effectively, and how to speak them in a way that shifts atmosphere, not hype. And I need you to stay with me, because one of these psalms was so disruptive that we were instructed never to monitor households where it was spoken daily. That's not exaggeration, that's testimony. To understand why certain psalms broke poverty so effectively, you have to understand how poverty actually operates in the spiritual realm. In witchcraft, poverty was never treated as a lack of money. Money is only the symptom. Poverty is a governing spirit that works through permission, patterns, and silence. It feeds on uncertainty. It thrives on delay. It anchors itself in environments where people believe struggle is normal. That's why we didn't fear random prayers for money. We feared psalms that re-established order. The psalms are not requests, they are legal declarations. Most people read psalms devotionally. That's good, but incomplete. In the occult, we learned very quickly that Psalms function like courtroom language. They don't ask God to notice injustice. They announce that God already has. When a believer speaks a psalm correctly, they are not asking for provision, they are reminding the spiritual realm of who governs supply. And poverty hates reminders. Here's why. Poverty depends on amnesia. It survives when people forget covenant. It stays when people normalize lack. But Psalms restore memory. They recall promises. They reassert ownership. They define inheritance. I watched households pray for financial breakthrough for years with no result, then suddenly experience change when someone began reading Psalms daily, calmly, consistently, without panic. Why? Because Psalms shift jurisdiction, not emotion. Witchcraft cannot argue with jurisdiction. When a psalm declares, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," that is not hope. That is a boundary. It redraws the perimeter of provision. When a psalm declares, "Wealth and riches are in his house, and his righteousness endures forever," it is not ambition, it is alignment. We knew assignments were failing when poverty stopped whispering urgency and started losing access. And here's the detail most people don't realize. Psalms work best when spoken without desperation. Desperation strengthens poverty, position weakens it. In the occult, we monitor tone as much as content. When believers read Psalms as if pleading, nothing changed. But when they read them as if stating facts, without strain, financial pressure began to lift. That's why we tried to distract people away from Psalms and toward endless requests. Requests keep focus on lack. Psalms restore authority. In the next chapter, I'm going to reveal the first psalm that consistently disrupted poverty cycles, why it works, and how to speak it so it shifts atmosphere instead of becoming religious routine. Stay with me. This is where things begin to break. This was the first psalm we learned to watch for, and the one we tried hardest to neutralize. Psalm 23. Most people think it's a comfort psalm, a funeral psalm, something gentle, poetic, soothing. That misunderstanding is exactly why it's so powerful. Psalm 23 is not a prayer, it's a jurisdiction statement. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. When that line is spoken with understanding, it does something devastating to poverty. It doesn't ask for provision. It forbids lack. In the occult, we understood shepherd language very well. A shepherd doesn't negotiate with wolves. He defines territory. Where the shepherd governs, predators do not decide outcomes. When someone consistently spoke, Psalm 23, not emotionally, not dramatically, but calmly, it redrew the boundaries around their life. Poverty could approach, but it could not settle. We saw this repeatedly. Money issues didn't vanish overnight, but the leakage stopped. Unexpected expenses reduced. Stability returned before increase. Peace came before provision. That order matters. Psalm 23 doesn't promise overflow first. It promises covering. And once covering is restored, provision follows naturally. Here's how believers unintentionally weakened it. They rushed it. They recited it without pausing. They treated it like poetry instead of policy. But when someone slowed down and spoke it as truth, especially the first and last lines, poverty lost its grip. Thou preparest a table before me. That line isn't about blessing someday. It's about supply in hostile environments. We hated that verse because it meant conditions didn't matter anymore. Lack thrives on environment, economy, family history, job market, timing. Psalm 23 removes environment as the deciding factor. It establishes God as source, not circumstance. And once source is clarified, poverty has no argument. I remember households where this psalm was spoken daily, often quietly, often in the morning or before sleep. We were instructed to stop monitoring them, not because they were rich, but because poverty no longer had legal ground. In the next chapter, I'm going to reveal the second psalm, the one that doesn't just block poverty, but actively breaks inherited financial cycles. This is where generational patterns start collapsing. Stay with me. This psalm made us extremely uncomfortable because it didn't just affect one person, it affected bloodlines. Psalm 112. In the occult, generational poverty was one of our strongest structures, not because families were cursed, but because patterns were inherited and normalized. Same struggles, same ceilings, same financial stress repeating across decades. Psalm 112 didn't ask God to fix that. It declared it broken. Blessed is the man who fears the Lord. Wealth and riches shall be in his house, and his righteousness endures forever. That verse alone dismantled a core poverty lie we relied on, that righteousness and provision don't coexist. Many believers secretly believe that struggling is noble, that abundance is suspicious, that provision somehow contradicts holiness. And Psalm 112 destroys that false humility instantly. In witchcraft, we knew that as long as people believed poverty was virtuous, they would protect it without realizing it. Psalm 112 removed that protection. But here's the part that terrified us most. His descendants will be mighty in the land. That line means poverty doesn't get to pass through generations anymore. When this psalm was spoken consistently in a household, we saw patterns collapse. Chronic debt cycles broke, family financial fear softened, children made wiser decisions naturally, opportunity began appearing in unexpected places. Not overnight wealth, but long-term stability. Psalm 112 works because it reframes identity. It doesn't say, God, please help me. It says, this is who the righteous are. Identity always outranks effort. When someone speaks Psalm 112, they stop fighting poverty as an enemy and start outgrowing it as an outdated system. But again, tone mattered. When people read it hoping to become something, nothing changed. When they read it as confirmation of who they already were in covenant, poverty lost leverage. We were trained to disrupt this psalm through distraction, business, doubt, minimization, anything to stop consistency. Because Psalm 112 doesn't work through intensity, it works through continuity. I saw families who spoke this psalm once a day, sometimes quietly at breakfast, experience more financial healing than those who prayed aggressively for hours. That's because cycles break when order replaces chaos. In the next chapter, I'm going to reveal the third psalm, the one that targets hidden devourers, sudden losses, mysterious expenses, and money that disappears without explanation. This psalm didn't just restore provision, it closed doors. Stay with me. This psalm was one of the most misunderstood and one of the most dangerous to poverty assignments. Psalm 91. Most believers treat Psalm 91 as a protection psalm only. Safety, accidents, sickness, night fears. That's true, but incomplete. In the occult, we understood that protection and provision are inseparable. Whatever is not protected will eventually be drained. Psalm 91 didn't just protect people, it protected what belonged to them. Hidden devourers hate protection language. Financial leakage rarely looks dramatic. It shows up as sudden expenses that don't make sense, money disappearing without clear reason, constant, almost enough, seasons, repairs, losses, delays that keep repeating. We didn't always cause those things directly. Many times, we simply removed covering and let systems collapse on their own. Psalm 91 restored that covering. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. That verse establishes location, dwelling, abiding, remaining. Poverty cannot operate effectively where someone is consistently positioned under authority. And then comes the line we hated. No evil shall befall you, nor shall any plague come near your dwelling. Notice what it protects, the dwelling, not just the person. That includes finances, resources, household flow, and stability. When Psalm 91 was spoken consistently, not fearfully, not reactively, we saw something specific happen. Losses slowed, then stopped. It wasn't always immediate increase, but the drain closed. That's critical. Increase means nothing if leakage remains open. Psalm 91 works by closing access points, not loudly, quietly, invisibly. And once access closes, poverty assignments starve. But here's the mistake people made. They only spoke Psalm 91 after loss occurred. That turned it into reaction instead of positioning. When believers spoke it proactively, daily, calmly, without panic, it functioned as a perimeter. Poverty couldn't enter easily, and devourers had nothing to feed on. In witchcraft, we measured success by repetition. One-time declarations didn't concern us. Consistent positioning did. Psalm 23 established boundary. Psalm 112 redefined inheritance. Psalm 91 secured the perimeter. Together, they formed a structure poverty couldn't survive in. In the next chapter, I'm going to explain how to speak these psalms correctly, not as magic words, but as covenant alignment, so they don't become routine and lose sharpness. This is where people either break poverty or just read about it. Stay with me.